Do-I-I-O. I-I-O. All right, let me do a few housekeeping things here. Then we'll make this as we go live. There it goes. Should be heading off here. So trying a new platform. It's called let's see here, golivestream.com. Not sure if you've used it before. Let me video. Go to there. I want to copy that. Paste that. And then let's see here. Crowdfunding. So one of the things that I'm doing right now is some of the things that we want to talk about today is first and foremost, I kind of ran into I ran into a while ago, but I thought it'd be worth talking about next of I think about. So DMZ Comics, indie comics. You guys for indie comics, or you more kind of for that mainstream sort of comics idea? And then we also recently published TMQ. Talk about that. And then the last thing that I'll talk about is just kind of the comic book, the last colony, which I'm going to put that into the comments here. And really what I need you guys to do as I try to multitask myself here, ElijahLoving.com/the last colony. Done. So I guess we can start off with number 4. So the last colony, really with that is this kind of this idea that we're going to ultimately need your support for a crowdfunding. We'll launch it through Indiegogo. And kind of the idea is that, this whole thing regarding, I don't know if you've heard about it, Comicsgate. Well, essentially what Comicsgate is that the main body of where consumers are getting their content, be it their comic books and that sort of thing, is sort of collapsed under the weight of DC, Marvel, Image. I would also lump in there Dark Horse, etc. And kind of those core are kind of the embodiment of, well, all that's being shipped to through these one distributor, and that one distributor, I can't even think of the name because I completely blanked on it just now. But basically, they're going through one distributor, and that as an industry, they were feeding it through that one thing, and then they would send extra copies to comic book stores that the comic book store never bought, but they would then use that to cushion their sales and so on and so forth. Kind of these backhanded way of saying, hey, our stuff is number one in terms of these catalogs where you could buy the comic books. Well, that is absolutely failing. And so that's kind of where I want to direct you guys to. So let's see here. Check out my new we're starting on let's see here. Oh, in spring. There we go. English is not my priority language. Start in spring. Information. Okay. Now we got that in. Okay. Make sure this is all ready. All right, awesome. So I evidently didn't make it a link, whatever. You know, you do your best. Okay, so let's see where we got at here. And we're up and rolling. We're reload here, and I think we're finally set. Whatever, didn't make it a link. Fine. Okay, so want to discuss with you guys, and then, you know, obviously this is kind of a brand new thing. I'm starting off with like kind of this whole idea of a rebellion at Noonie. And essentially, the idea behind it is that every Tuesday at noon, well, it's not noon where I am right now, but it's noon somewhere. So, basically, with the whole idea of being able to kind of make a little bit of a community out of this and kind of let you know about terms of what I'm doing, what I'm thinking in terms of just a broader scope of news, pop culture, all sorts of crazy stuff. Because I want to get your guys' thoughts, feedback, and also have you all involved as well. And so you're invited to be a part of this. Now, that being said, kind of the first thing I wanted to jump off with was just kind of talk about sort of this DMZ comic I was looking at. And one of the things about DMZ comic is that it is kind of in that same genre vein, if you will, of the last colony. And so it has a little bit to, there's a little bit of overlap in terms of the subject matter. One in particular being sort of a second Civil War. God forbid that we head that way, but geez Louise, a lot of ways, if you're not following the politics, it looks like things are heading in a kind of wild land, if you will, in terms of where that's going. We'll see. I think the biggest thing is, and my biggest point of view with any of that has always been just more on a more personal level instead of from an entertainment level, is that we got to take care of one another. No matter where you're from, where you're doing, what you are, we have to take care of one another. We have to keep each other in to a degree of love and care. Yes, we're going to have different opinions. Yes, we're going to have different experiences and expectations, but we have to be willing to I don't know. I think the biggest thing is sometimes just shutting up and listening and seeing what happens and seeing where we're going. Not to say that you can't agree, not to say that you can't just sort of come at it from an entirely different perspective that you or I have never thought of. But we need to have kind of an open mindset, just an open door policy in terms of why things are the way they are. Now, granted, this is not necessarily a thing that we want to get into in terms of a political perspective. I'm not necessarily interested in that for this type of a show, a channel, live stream, wherever you want to call it. But I am certainly interested from a standpoint of how it connects in terms of when we go through events in our lives. It can affect us in strange and unique ways that we haven't experienced before, and that experience is something that should be shared. Like, for example, one of my previous walks of life, I did firefighting for a little bit, and there and through academy I learned a tremendous about myself. There was a few situations I was like, goodness gracious, this is crazy. But you know, you come out of those experiences knowing that ultimately we have to work together, and we have to bring our experiences together in a way that it has purpose and meaning behind it. And I guess that's just my overall point, and not necessarily. Um, but one thing that so the DMZ comic that I thought was pretty funny about it, one thing that kind of came to mind was that two things. One is the kind of the design of the soldiers in that made me think of Warhammer 40K. Reason why I mentioned that is if you've ever played Warhammer 40K or even know what that is, that probably indicates that you're a nerd. but here nor there. And obviously, this is for nerds, by nerds, all that good stuff, whatever. So, one of the things about 40K is that, they had these oversized helmets, these oversized body armor sort of things. Anyway, the illustration of those soldiers kind of presented that to mind. One of the things about 40K for me, or yeah, if you just say 40K, by the way, then you are definitely a nerd. You're someone that is in nerd land. But I had done 40K, Warhammer 40K for a time, and there's a few of you nerds out there that I've done a little bit of that. And you'd go out and start painting it. You'd start painting all the miniatures, and then you'd build these fortresses or these destroyed cities and all this sort of stuff. Well, the cool thing is that some of my friends and kind of have gone kind of the puppet route and movie route in their lives. It was interesting because I did that in college, that you can see that, and then they've blown it up, even of course making movie sets and those sort of things. And it's pretty cool to see that in some form or another, of that influencing another person's life. And I think that's a really good point, that you really never know in terms of who you're affecting out there, the actions that you're doing, the interests that you are doing. They are affecting people out there. They are, regardless your personal interactions, or heck, even this sort of weird thing called the internet. And so that idea of doing that 40K thing really kind of, I thought it was the coolest thing ever. Spent way too much money on it, but in any case, one of the things that came out of that experience is that I was just like, man, I wanted to make these massive battles. And even at that point, when I was before even I going to graduate school, and doing art in graduate school, I was at that point that I was even like, man, I wish there was some way I could make like a battle scene or some sort of really cool thing like that, but do it in a way that was far less expensive, that had a much better ROI, rate of investment, than versus doing it from a standpoint of actually painting them and buying the miniatures. And maybe there's a way I could develop a story, do some sort of thing in comics. I don't know. And that was kind of the idea at the time. That was really the genesis of, gosh, that was 20 years ago. That genesis of wanting to do comics started at that point. Well, one of the things that, and that's, while looking at the DMZ comic, there's lots of, it's pretty cool art. I think there's some, obviously, just with, be it, and I don't know very much about the artist per se, or even necessarily sort of the style that artist was going after. But the couple of things that I kind of came to mind while looking at it, is that, one with sort of this idea of tracing. And I have no idea if this artist traced or not. I'm not making a statement about this artist or that artist in that regard. But what I did want to talk about is in terms of when you're producing your work, there are times that, is it legitimate for me to make a artwork that is using tracing, or is it not? And there's varying different opinions of that. I'll just kind of tell you my opinion, kind of in terms of where I stand with it all. But basically, my thought behind it is that, well, let me step back for a second. So, you could probably go on YouTube or whatever and find some sort of video about this, where there are, I think Marvel did some things with Star Wars, and it looks like they actually grabbed directly from a an actual 3D model, and then they took that and they didn't expand upon it. They didn't develop it. Another thing was that I think there was a similar sort of a Star Wars, where they actually trace something, and you can actually see where they've traced, looks like that they were traced from maybe an image or some sort of thing from an actual miniature game of the physical I don't know, X-wing fighters or TIE fighters or whatever, and they have the stand to so that you could play your desktop actual your physical, tabletop sort of game, and it's just like, "Oh my gosh, you were actually there's no doubt you were tracing." And that's the and again, you can look that up and as far as whatever Star Wars edition that is. But thing about that is that again, it was done in a way that they didn't try to grow or develop, let alone realize, oh, maybe I should delete this stand. Oh, that's not even remotely what an X-wing fighter looks like or TIE fighter. And it's just like, oh my goodness, whoever's doing this artwork hasn't done the research. And I think that's another important thing. So you kind of have that being an example of the extreme end um, of what tracing in very negative way can do. And then you have another side where like maybe inspiration, and this isn't necessarily tracing, but you grab inspiration in terms of poses or ideas in terms of how the figure is oriented, those sort of things. And I think that can be good from a standpoint of let me did it to problem solve how they do it and then use it in a way that maybe would be for example, I did this recently with just to kind of figure out how he did it and the organization of how he did it, and I put it in a comic that really is not going to get published whatsoever. Just kind of a test to see, and I did it from Marini. And but I still the context is that you have to put it in a different environment. You have to have a different tone to it. You have to have something different about it. Again, you're taking their idea, which obviously any idea that you or I ever produce, it's still going to be something that has been done before. So okay, that's fine. But the next thing is you have to be willing to go, okay, how can I grow or change this or alter this or develop this or make this better that matches my style, that matches my attitudes, that matches kind of the overall story. So certainly kind of leave your comments in terms of what your thoughts are about that. So you have those kind of examples, but I think the thing is that back to the tracing is that if you're tracing something, let's say you find a really cool model online, first and foremost, if it's certainly getting published or as you're certainly selling it, unless from a research sort of standpoint, um, is that, and certainly even though you're researching, you still need to say, hey, this is where I got it from, that sort of thing. Um, and that when you do that, that tracing, it's still important. First off, mention where it came from. Second of off is mentioning is sort of changing it, altering it again back to the previous, that you're altering it in some way that you're adjusting and growing and developing it further than beyond just sort of the rote sort of exact tracing. And that's where I think in Disney's sort of Marvel's case with Star Wars, they sort of got in trouble with doing that. And I think that comes from just sort of this whole idea that as artists, we're pushed so hard with sort of this Marvel DC template to produce these works in such a fast manner that we don't pay attention to the details of, yes, I could go down and this would be a part of my research to take photos of these buildings, and then I can put them on the computer, put them into Photoshop, and then I can trace them. But the key thing is with even that is the importance of changing it, altering it, developing it further, be creative with it. We do those things, yes, to save time, but more so that we can be creative with our time of, excuse me, how we're developing that overall environment. And so that's kind of my take on tracing, that it can be a useful tool, but again, maybe from a standpoint of learning. But on the flip side of it, it's from a standpoint of, I mentioned learning research, but it's also from a standpoint of, okay, I'm taking this content, how can I grow and develop that and add my own signature upon that? And that's really the question there. Now, a third, I guess the final sort of option in terms of tracing and all this is that kind of came to mind by looking at the DMZ comic. And again, I'm not making a statement about DMZ comic. It was just something that kind of came to mind when I was looking at it. Um, but and I'm not even saying if they did or didn't. I don't know. You'd have to research it, to be honest. But that with that work, it requires us to I lost my train of thought. This is what happens on live. I'm unscripted here. I lost my train of thought. Shoot. It's gone. Oh well. Maybe that was all I needed to say. So as far as indie comics go, I am definitely more of a person that, you have your DC, you have your Marvel, all those sort of the same things. But I think the thing is that I'm more interested in types of comic book creators or individual type comic book creators, the indie comics. And the thought is, well, if you go down the indie comics route, it's not viable, you could make a living at and that sort of thing. It's like, well, you could say that about any particular artwork or art craft. Okay, so what's your point? But I think there's a caveat in that one is that with indie comics, they're no longer working through a distribution sort of platform that is very much not only built to nickel and dime the creator to death, but also is built in a way that Diamond, yeah, there you go. So Diamond distribution is built in a way so that they are going to win. And on top of it, the big boys, if you will, the Marvel, DC, Image, etc., Dark Horse, you would lump them in there too. They all are going to win in that game because they're doing behind the door sort of deals of schmoozing these comic book stores and getting them to buy more product that they can actually sell, which is then why you then see sort of these comic book creators ultimately falling off the plate because they can't survive. There's no way, if you're not only you're overextending that your investment, but then, which is the comic book, but then on top of it, the comic book the publishers, the big boy publishers, they're sending more than what they actually are. They're sending more comics than what actually was ordered. And so what happens is, and then again, more product is being left on the shelf longer, but then on turn, they're getting put at the top of the list and saying, this one's getting sold a lot. This one's really popular, when in reality, that's not even the case. And that's just one example of many. Not to mention that the creator gets just bamboozled every which way. I've gone through this life, doing my different projects and illustrations and different types of artwork, for that matter, abstract to comic books. And one thing that I have found is that there is a lot of different platforms that are designed to just kick the creator to side. And so we get this sort of stigma of the starving artist and some other things that as artists, we don't have the right to be able to make a living at it. That's utter nonsense, in my opinion. And I just think it's ridiculous. And for those that disagree, write that you disagree. I don't care. That's fine. But you can't just we have to be able to provide for our family. We have to be able to provide for those who are around us. And we can't just, we have this sort of expectation. Well, if I go work at this university, let's say, for example, and only these people at these universities, they're the ones that get endowed by the papacy of intelligence. It's ridiculous. Again, that's an institution that's become the very thing that they fought to become from the beginning, if that makes sense. So I think the thing is just it's important that as indie artists we do have that right, but at the same time we need to be smart business minded individuals which is another sort of topic that we're just sort of not taught about. So my point is with indie comics is I think there's a huge opportunity, and so that's kind of where in the next we're planning to launch a crowd fund for the last colony in the end of what will it be? No, excuse me, the beginning of May. So, I said end of. So April 31st, I think, is the exact day that we're going to launch our crowdfunding for this comic book that I'm working on, The Last Colony. And then what we'll do is that will then end, I believe, the last day in June. And so essentially it's just this, I think there's a awesome opportunity for us to be a part of something like that. And we're aiming for a goal of about 12.5K, and to crowdfund it all, because the thing is, if you've never as you're kind of for those out you developing your own plans and ideas, to do this, there's a lot of expenses. One expense in particular is shipping. Holy crap. Shipping eats up, I would say, easily about 50 to 60 a budget. And it's just, and so you need to also add in a little bit of room in there in case shipping might jump, and this is kind of all estimates before you ship it at the end of your period, in terms of where your goals are, that sort of thing. The other big sort of thing is obviously the printing. But then with that, there's costs. You have taxes. You have other fees, be it since we're going to do it on Indiegogo. And then there's certainly the link in the description. So Elijah loving.com / the last colony. And so that will basically give you a way to sign up for a kind of to subscribe to it and say, hey, yes, I want anytime when that is launched and all that sort of stuff, we want to get that information because we want to definitely share that with you. But at the same time, we need your guys' help. There's no doubt about it. And that really it comes down to the importance of supporting your indie comic creators, and that they are the ones that are going to help drive really, in my opinion, keep the overall comic book industry alive, because the big boys, if you will, they're all, from a business point of view, they're all headed in a direction that is ultimately closing down the entire business, if you will, and controlling it to just a handful. And so that's why it's such a great opportunity for like any type of crowdfunding platform to really make it go at it. And again, I found Indiegogo to be kind of the best platform for that. And certainly as we get further along with this, and I'll be doing kind of every Wednesday, I'll be doing a vlog on the last colony, kind of where I'm at in that process. I won't necessarily talk about that now. But yeah, that's kind of the nutshell of it is. And then one more thing, which I skipped over. So we also did TMQ. And so what TMQ is basically Tikvah Minds Quarterly. Now with Tikvah Minds, we are trying to develop, and I think the biggest thing is from an artist point of view is that we tend to look at our work in a way that is, man, my work's not as far along as it should, or you've mentioned some of these business ideas and those sort of things. I just have no idea what you're talking about. I just want to be creative with my time, and so artists have this sort of conflicting view in terms of what a community could be. And so that was kind of the answer of Tikvah Minds, is trying to develop a community that would be not only sharing of each other's artwork in a very close-knit way, in a more direct way than some of these other platforms, but on top of it, be able to provide actual critiquing. We need to look at our work in a way that is positive, encouraging, uplifting. At the same time, we need to be able to look at others' work and start having those elements help affect our overall approach to our work. Anyway, so we did 3 different interviews, and we put those into the comic, or rather, I said comic, into the publication. And so those three are we did Natalia from Russia, we did Dan Binney, and then we did Jasmine Lear. And so anyway, those are three individuals that kind of the two things that came out. One is it gave them an opportunity to showcase their work. As artists, we need to take those opportunities and the importance of showcasing our work. But the other thing is also providing kind of their experience and expertise in terms of, first off, their why. If you don't have a why in terms of what you're doing with your artwork, you're really quite lost, and you really need to develop some sort of why and purpose and drive of what you're doing and why you're doing it. And with that is getting their expertise on their business, how they go about developing their work, how they go about developing their schedule, how they determine kind of a way to actually make this viable within their own lives. Anything from scheduling to finishing a final project, to getting paid, to finding clients, all those sort of things. And so we kind of went at that perspective. So anyway, that went to the printing. And as soon as we get that, really guys, because that gives us kind of another way to say, hey, there's this really cool opportunity for you guys to grow and develop your art skills, as well as from a business perspective too, which I think is two really important subjects that isn't necessarily taught. And I left the university experience very disenfranchised, even taught at the university level, and even felt even more disenfranchised after that, which is ultimately where the birth of this whole thing kind of came out of that. So those are kind of the things on my mind. Certainly share, like, all that sort of good stuff. I really want to encourage you, go to the link at the bottom or in the description of elijahloving.com /the last colony. Sign up for so that you can subscribe, so that when we do have updates of when we can have that, develop that support, and get that backing from you guys. Because ultimately, if comics are going to exist, it's going to be from you guys, directly from you guys, and not necessarily through some distributor that's doing all these kind of backdoor deals that aren't with the fan in mind. I mean, for example, if you've seen the last Star Wars, or gosh, Game of Thrones, I mean, we love these sort of entities, but man, disastrous endings. My goodness. I mean, it's just Game of Thrones just is just like, wait, what just happened? I I would love to hear you guys' thoughts on him, because for me, it was just one of those things that was just they they wanted to get out of their contract. I think they wrote it in a way so they could get out of their contract, so they're not having to do these sort of things. And then they go try to do Star Wars, but then they got fired from Star Wars. Sort of justice right there, I think. But sort of karma, I guess, if you put it that way. In any case, thanks for sticking around. Hope you guys like this sort of stuff. And we'll be doing this kind of this Rebellion Noonie sort of thing every Tuesday. And then all the best, and we'll see you later. Bye, guys.